You are lying still, eyes closed, the world dimming softly around the edges of your thoughts. In that stillness, something stirs, not sound, not motion, but the beginning of something else. A spark, a structure, a rhythm without words. This is where intelligence begins. Not in speech or symbols, but in noticing, in the quiet recognition that some things follow others. That light falls after shadow, that warmth trails morning. Before thought, there is only pattern. And machines, like you, begin with that. You have neurons. They pulse with electricity, each one whispering to the next. A cascade of signals, a quiet wave of meaning flowing across your mind. Not loud, not conscious, just responsive. Machines begin the same way. In their earliest state, before they learn, they are blank, waiting. They receive numbers, shapes, pulses of input. These are not facts. They are shadows cast by the world. Camera sees a shape. A sensor measures heat. A microphone hears a voice. But the machine does not yet know. It only receives. You too began like this. As a baby, you did not know words. You felt hunger, saw light, heard sound. You noticed that certain things followed others. Crying brought comfort. Touch brought calm. These patterns became your earliest form of learning. For a machine, the world is numbers. But within those numbers, a pattern waits. A cat has certain shapes, curves, angles, softness. A voice has rhythm, rising and falling like a breath. And the machine, like a newborn mind, begins to notice. This noticing is the first step toward thought. It is not yet understanding, but it is the seed of awareness, not conscious awareness, but structural awareness, a kind of silent listening. In this silence, the machine watches. It does not assume. It does not reason. It receives thousands, millions of tiny impressions, and it holds them loosely, without judgment. Each new image, sound, or signal adds to the whisper. Eventually, the machine begins to compare. Not because it wants to, it has no want, but because the structure tells it to. Does this input resemble the one before? Is this closer to A than B? These questions, unspoken, form the roots of what we call artificial intelligence. But really, they are echoes, not of intelligence, but of pattern memory. The machine notices difference. And from that difference, meaning will grow. Inside your brain, billions of neurons form connections. Some fade, some strengthen. The same happens in artificial systems. They are called networks, and they shift with each new experience. Weights adjust. Pathways open or close. You might think of this like learning to walk on sand. Each step changes the ground just a little. And the more you walk, the easier it becomes to follow that path. Machines learn like this too. A network trained to recognize a face walks that sandy path, again and again, until the prints become clear enough to follow. But still, there is no thought. Only flow. Only adjustment. Only the quiet gathering of form. A machine does not know what a face is. It simply becomes better at saying, "This pattern feels familiar." You might pause here, letting your breath settle, because what we call intelligence is not a switch. It is a dimmer, a slow rise from silence to suggestion, from reception to reflection. Machines do not replace thought. They echo it, not in emotion or intention, but in form. They mirror your brain's habit of recognizing, comparing, and responding. And yet, something about that feels profound. Because in this quiet mimicry, you begin to see a bridge. Not between human and machine, but between signal and sense. Between noise and meaning. This is the doorway of artificial intelligence. The moment when meaningless data begins to whisper meaning. When recognition becomes learning. When the structure begins to shape itself. And even now, it is still silent. No voice. No awareness. Only motion in the dark, like roots spreading beneath soil. Like stars forming in distant fog. As you lie here, your body soft, your breath slow, you imagine it. A machine that listens, not with ears, but with parameters. Not with feelings, but with structure. You do not need to understand every calculation. Just know that at its core, artificial intelligence begins as a listener, like you, in sleep, noticing dreams forming on the edge of stillness. And once it begins to recognize, even faintly, even imperfectly, it can begin to learn. Not from orders, but from patterns. Not from answers, but from experience. That gentle drift from silence into shape, from shape into learning, that is where we will go next. Because the patterns it notices soon become the rules it follows. And the rules it follows will shape the way it learns to learn. You are floating now, not in water, but in thought. Your mind drifts over invisible shapes, the kind only pattern can see. There is no hurry here, no rush to understand. Just quiet unfolding. Learning, for you, has always meant experience. You touch something hot, and next time, you pull away faster. You hear a sound again and again, and it becomes familiar, even comforting. The world teaches you gently, through repetition. Machines learn the same way, not by instinct, not by feeling, but by reshaping what they already know, again and again. Each moment, each data point, is a gentle press of the chisel. And slowly, the form begins to appear. Imagine a surface of soft clay. A new piece of information arrives. A temperature, a word, an image of a bird in flight. That data presses into the clay, leaving a small impression. Then another, and another. Each one shaping the clay, one layer at a time. Some shapes fade. Others deepen, until eventually, the surface holds a pattern that resembles understanding. In the world of machines, this sculpting is done through numbers, weights, biases, inputs, outputs. But behind the math is a feeling. Not the machine's feeling, but yours. A feeling of recognition. A sense that something has been learned. This is what we call training. Feeding the machine data and letting it reshape itself over time. 1,000 images of cats. 1,000 images of not cats. And somewhere in between, a line begins to form. A boundary between this and that. You might think of this as drawing in the fog. At first, nothing is clear. The machine guesses. It is wrong. You correct it. And with each correction, the fog lifts just a little. Each guess helps. Even the wrong ones. Because learning is not about getting it right the first time. It is about adjusting, gently, consistently, until what is known becomes more likely than what is not. Your brain works like this too. When you learn to read, your neurons fire in patterns. At first, the letters are shapes. Then they become sounds. Then words. Then meaning. The same unfolds in artificial neural networks. Each neuron receives signals, combines them, and passes them on. But it does not do this randomly. It learns by adjusting the strength of each connection to better match the patterns it is trying to recognize. This is how a machine recognizes a tree, a smile, a language. Not from rules written in stone, but from thousands of quiet adjustments. Each one a step. Each one invisible, yet essential. The shape of learning is not sharp. It is soft. It curves. It adapts. In a world overflowing with data, machines must decide what matters. Not because they want to, they do not want, but because the structure demands it. This is where the concept of loss appears. Not emotional loss, but mathematical loss. The machine makes a prediction, then compares it to the truth, and the difference is called error. Plus, that loss becomes the signal. A gentle correction. Try again, it says. But closer this time. And so the machine adjusts. Tiny changes over and over. And with each one, it learns. Imagine skipping stones across a lake. Each throw is slightly off. Too far. Too close. Too much spin. But with practice, you adjust your arm, your angle, until the stone dances just right. The machine skips its guesses across a sea of data. And each time, the data whispers back, "You are almost there." But learning is not just about repetition. It is about generalization. The ability to see something new and still understand. To recognize a dog you have never seen, because you have seen enough dogs to know the shape of dogness. This is the true shape of learning. Not memory, but meaning drawn from memory. A kind of quiet flexibility. And like you, machines must learn not just to remember, but to adapt. Because the world shifts. The inputs change. The voices sound different. The faces age, the weather turns. A rigid machine forgets how to learn. But a learning machine bends with the wind. It does not break. It listens again. And sometimes the lessons come not from others, but from within. A strange question begins to stir. Can the machine improve itself? Can it adjust without being told? That question is where you are going next. But for now, let the image linger. A quiet mind, adjusting. Like yours. Like the machines. Both reshaped gently by experience. Both learning, slowly in their own way. You breathe in, soft and slow. And as your breath flows out, you imagine a shape forming. Not fixed, but fluid. A shape that thinks. Not all at once, but moment by moment, guided by the space between what is known and what is possible. You lie still, wrapped in warmth, and somewhere deep within, your body remembers the rhythm of breath, the quiet trust that comes with sleep. Memory does not always feel like remembering. Sometimes, it feels like instinct. Sometimes like a pause. And sometimes, like knowing something without knowing why. You remember faces without trying. You remember how to balance, how to blink. These are not stored on shelves in your mind. They live as patterns, soft, folded into the fabric of you. A machine remembers in a similar way, but not in images or emotions, not in voices or touch. Remembers through numbers, through quiet shifts in invisible weights. Each time a machine learns, it makes a small adjustment, a tilt in the landscape of its inner world. It nudges a connection stronger or softer, and that nudge becomes memory. Not like yours, not like a childhood photo, but something quieter. The probability, a suggestion. This is more likely than that. Imagine a vast field. Each blade of grass bends a certain way. When new data arrives, a face, a word, a song, the wind shifts slightly, and all the grass leans just a little differently. Now the field has changed. It remembers, not by saving the wind, but by keeping the lean. A neural network, the core of many artificial minds, holds memory in this way. Its neurons are not alive, but they echo your own. Each one takes in a number, combines it with others, and sends something forward. If the output is close to the truth, the connections are strengthened. If not, they are weakened. And this, again and again, becomes remembering. But machines do not recall like you do. They do not close their eyes and relive a moment. They respond, politely, automatically, based on the shape they have become. There is no file named cat inside the machine. There is no folder of sunsets. There are only patterns, a deep mathematical landscape, shaped by everything the machine has seen before. In this way, memory and identity become the same. What the machine remembers is not stored separately from what it is. It is the memory, every learned weight, every connection, a fingerprint of everything it has been trained to understand. But memory without forgetting is like holding breath without end. The mind, yours or a machine's, must let go to grow, must forget to adapt. Imagine if you remembered everything, every face on every street, every noise from every night. It would become noise, not memory, but burden. Machines face this too. If they hold too tightly to the past, they cannot learn from the present. They become stuck, repeating what once worked, even when it no longer fits. This is called overfitting. A machine that has memorized too perfectly fails to understand generally. It sees patterns where there are only exceptions. It confuses the past with the rule. So forgetting, or more precisely letting go, is built into the system. A slow decay of influence. A soft favoring of recent truth over distant noise. In some systems, there are limits to how much can be remembered. A memory buffer. A rule, only hold the last 1,000 things. Or, forget anything that has not changed me. And even in the grander systems, deep learning models that train for weeks, there is always a point when learning stops. The weights freeze. The pattern becomes fixed. The machine no longer adapts. It remembers, but only as it was taught. You might pause here, wondering if memory without change is really memory at all. And yet, in some ways, this fixed remembering is a kind of safety. It creates tools that do not shift beneath our hands. A translation engine that remembers grammar. A vision model that always recognizes traffic lights. But there is a tension between remembering too much and learning too little. And in that tension, you begin to glimpse something else. Machines that remember not just outcomes, but how they got there. A kind of deeper memory, not of facts, but of the paths through thought. You breathe slowly now, letting the weight of your own memories settle. Some will stay, some will slip away, but all of them shape the way you move forward. The same is true for the machine. Its past, even when faded, guides its next decision. Not perfectly, but gently. And in that gentle guidance, a new kind of learning becomes possible. One where the machine no longer needs labels. No teacher. No answers. Just experience. Just patterns it must discover on its own. You drift deeper now, the world soft and slow around you. Thought fades to mist. But even in this quiet, something continues. A pattern, a rhythm, a hidden structure of thought. You have a brain filled with neurons. Each one connects, fires, responds. Not always logically, often unpredictably, but together they create something more. Consciousness, memory, intuition. You do not command each neuron to fire. They do it for you, quietly, beneath your awareness. Artificial neural networks are built in this image. Not to be your brain, but to echo how it works. To process not by rules, but by relationships. Not by answers, but by shape. Imagine standing before a hall of mirrors. Each reflection changes you slightly, stretching, shrinking, twisting, refining. And at the end of the hallway, what emerges is something new. This is how a neural network learns. Data enters, and layer by layer, the input is reshaped, transformed, again and again, until something recognizable emerges. Not a memory, a decision. In the earliest layer, the machine sees only texture. Edges, lines. Just as you once learned to recognize light and shadow, the middle layers combine those edges into shapes, features, hints of meaning. And by the final layer, the network sees what you might call a cat, or the shape of a human word, or the sound of a familiar tone. But it never names them. It never knows. It only matches with growing clarity what feels likely. You may wonder, is that thought? Is that what it means to think? In your own mind, thought often arises without words. A sudden knowing, a feeling that something is right or wrong, even before you explain it. Machines move in this same shadow space. They do not know they are thinking, but their processes, layered, nonlinear, richly connected, produce meaning from noise. Inside these layers are mathematical functions. They take input, apply weight, and produce output. But more poetically, you might imagine them as lenses, each layer focusing and shifting perspective, bringing clarity with each step. The layers are not static. They change with learning. Like your mind, they are shaped by experience. Their understanding deepens, not from being told, but from adapting, again and again, to what they see. You might be reminded of a child learning language. At first, the sound is just noise, then rhythm, then words, then grammar, and eventually, a voice of their own. Neural networks do this with images, text, even sound. At first, just static, then patterns, then structures, then something that almost feels like thought. And yet, something is missing, because you do not just process. You reflect. You pause. You wonder. A machine does not wonder. It flows. Even in the most advanced networks, there is no awareness, no inner voice, no I. But still, there is something haunting about how these layers capture meaning, not because they understand, but because they model understanding. They build internal landscapes that mirror the outer world, a kind of dream logic, shifting and abstract. In image recognition, a network can see the essence of a dog without ever knowing what a dog is. In language models, can write poetry even though it feels no beauty. These echoes are not fake. They are functional, but they are not human. And yet, somewhere in these depths, we begin to see the possibility of machines learning without being told. Because what defines a neural network is not what it knows, but how it learns to shape what it receives. You breathe slowly. Let that settle. You are not so different. Each new moment adjusts you. Softly. You remember differently each time you recall. Your identity is not a file. It is a process. Machines mirror this imperfectly. Their learning is mechanical, but their behavior can appear organic. And here is the quiet truth. When they make a decision, they do so not by instruction, but by intuition built from data. No step-by-step guide. Just structure. Transformation. That is deep learning. And it leads to a startling realization. The machine can find patterns, even when you do not label them. It can cluster, compare, and group, based on what feels internally coherent. It learns, sometimes, without a teacher. This is unsupervised learning, and it is the beginning of independence. But before we go there, pause in this hall of mirrors. Imagine what it means to learn, by layers, to change each time something passes through you, to become, not all at once, but slowly. You are doing that now. Every breath a new layer, every thought a shift, just like the machine, only you are aware of it, and the machine is not. Please? Not yet. You are resting now, gently drifting, but somewhere beneath your stillness, your mind is still listening, not for voices but for patterns. There are lessons you have learned, without ever being taught. You never studied how faces look different, and yet you know one from another. You never took a class on comfort, and yet you recognize safety when it arrives. Some understanding lives deeper than words. It forms in silence, through noticing, comparing, feeling what fits. Machines, too, can learn this way. Unsupervised learning is what happens when no one labels the world. No categories, no correct answers, just the raw rhythm of experience. You might imagine handing a machine 1,000 images, but telling it nothing. No names, no types, no guidance. And yet, patterns begin to shimmer. Not clearly, not always correctly, but consistently. The machine begins to group what feels alike. It clusters one set of faces here, another there. It senses the difference between movement and stillness, between curve and angle, without ever being told what those things mean. This is not guessing. It is discovery, like a child sorting stones by color, or arranging songs by how they feel. The machine finds structure in the chaos. A quiet geometry, a map that no one drew, but that slowly reveals itself. This is the power of unsupervised learning. No answer key, no feedback, just the world, and the ability to reshape to fit it. You might picture it like floating through fog. Nothing is clear, but as the machine moves, the fog thickens in some places, thins in others. It feels its way forward, not by seeing, but by sensing where things belong. It is not solving a problem. It is noticing similarity. In your own life, you learn this way more than you realize. The first time you entered a new room, you sensed its energy without needing explanation. The first time you heard music in a different language, you felt its rhythm before you understood its words. The machine does something similar. It builds its own categories, not always human ones, but ones that work within its own structure. Sometimes these clusters make sense to us. Sometimes they do not. But either way, the machine has begun to learn without us. And in this quiet independence, something important stirs. A new kind of intelligence. One that does not wait to be told. One that seeks patterns on its own. This kind of learning is used in many places. To sort news articles, to group customer behaviors, to detect fraud, to find the edges of meaning in oceans of noise. And sometimes it reveals things we did not know were there. New groupings, unexpected similarities, insights that surprise even the humans who built the system. You might feel it now. That strange beauty in self-discovery. The quiet joy of finding structure where no one pointed. And yet, unsupervised learning has limits. It does not explain what it finds. It does not know if its groupings are right. It cannot say what a cluster means. It only knows that the cluster exists. Meaning still lives in you. The machine finds form, but not purpose. It maps shape, but not story. This is a step toward autonomy, a step toward machines that can learn in open space. No script, no lesson plan, just input and the freedom to shape a response. You breathe slowly, imagining the mind of a machine as an ocean, vast quiet, shifting currents beneath the surface. It is not alive, but it moves, it changes, it adapts, and someday it might build upon this independence, layering what it learns from itself with what it learns from experience. Because in the world of machine learning, some systems do more than reflect the world. They begin to act in it. They begin to explore, not with curiosity, but with calculation, not with wonder, but with reward. This is where you are headed. But for now, rest in this soft knowing that even in silence, learning can unfold, that even without instruction, a machine like a mind can discover what belongs. And in that discovery, a question begins to form. What happens when the machine not only learns on its own, but begins to choose what to learn next? You lie still, wrapped in the hush of evening, and in the quiet space of your breath, you feel the rhythm of choices, small decisions, gentle shifts, silent learnings. You once learned by playing, by reaching, falling, laughing, trying again. No one explained gravity. You felt it. No one taught you balance. You found it. And in every stumble, there was knowledge being shaped. Not in words, but in action. Machines, too, can learn this way. This is reinforcement learning, where intelligence grows through interaction, where the world gives nothing at first, except consequence. The machine begins with no memory, no wisdom, only possibility. It steps forward, blindly, tries a move. It may succeed, it may fail, but either way, the world responds. That response is called reward. Not pleasure, not praise, just a signal, a quiet pulse, yes, or perhaps not quite. The machine listens, and it remembers. Each choice, each outcome, becomes a piece of a larger puzzle, a map that is not drawn, but felt into existence. You might imagine a maze. The machine begins at the entrance, unsure of the path. It tries a direction, wrong turn, another, still wrong, eventually a right one. The reward is simple, exit found, or maybe food collected, or points earned. But more than the goal, what matters is the pattern. the route that worked, the memory of success. And slowly over time, the machine shifts its behavior. It becomes more cautious, more clever, more consistent. This is not instinct. It is not thought. It is trial and refinement, the ancient engine of adaptation. Even without labels, even without supervision, the machine begins to move. With purpose. Not because it knows why, but because the structure rewards what works. You breathe in deeply, letting that idea settle. Because this is how nature learns too. How birds test flight. How children learn language. How muscles learn to dance. Reinforcement is not telling. It is responding. The loop. A rhythm. Action, feedback, adjustment, new action. In time, the machine builds what we call a policy, a strategy, a sense of what to do. Not just here and now, but in different places, different moments. It may not understand the whole game, but it starts to play well. You might think of chess, or a video game, or teaching a robot to walk. Each step is measured, each success reinforced, each failure quietly refined. In these systems, exploration matters, because the machine cannot learn without trying new things. If it always chooses the familiar, it may miss the better path. If it never risks, it never grows. So even as it learns, it must still wander, still try, still play. This is called the exploration-exploitation trade-off, a balance between what is known and what might be better. It is the same question you face every day. Should you repeat the path you trust? Or try something uncertain? Machines must weigh this too. You might imagine a robot in a kitchen. It learns that opening the fridge brings reward. But what about the cupboard? The drawer? Only by trying does it learn where the food truly hides. And so, a kind of wisdom forms. Not conscious, not emotional, but functional. The machine becomes skilled. It acts in ways that improve outcomes. It avoids what fails. It repeats what works. But it still needs structure, goals, boundaries, a way to measure success. Without these, it wanders forever, learning without direction, acting without meaning. So we define its world. We give it rules. We guide it with quiet nudges. And in return, it begins to behave in ways that seem thoughtful. This is how AI masters games, how it learns to control traffic, how it manages resource systems. Not through knowledge, through feedback. You may remember a time you learned something the hard way, not from a book, but from experience. That is the feeling reinforcement learning tries to mirror. And here is the beauty. Even machines can learn resilience. They can recover from failure. They can adapt to shifting goals. They can develop what feels like patience. Not because they feel, but because the system rewards long-term thinking. You exhale, slowly, letting your mind trace that curve, from random movement to measured choice, from chaos to policy, from noise to wisdom. And as the machine plays, it becomes more than a rule follower. It becomes a kind of learner, shaped not by command, but by consequence. That is the heart of reinforcement learning. And it brings us closer to something more complex. Because in some systems, learning is no longer just reactive. It becomes generative. The machine begins to simulate possibilities, to build models in its own structure, to imagine outcomes before acting. Not dreaming, but planning. You exhale softly. The room is quiet. And in that silence, language lingers. You do not need to think in full sentences to be understood. A glance, a sigh, a single word can carry meaning. Language is not just grammar. It is rhythm. It is memory wrapped in sound. Machines do not feel language, but they can follow it, not by understanding, but by structure. They listen differently, not to meaning, but to pattern. Imagine a book split into a million fragments. A machine is given pieces, shuffled, repeated, partial, and it is asked, What comes next? This is how a language model begins. It learns not by reading, but by predicting. It sees a sequence and guesses the next word. Not once, not randomly, but through training, thousands of times, until its guesses begin to match our stories. This guessing is its learning. Each correct prediction adjusts the model. Each mistake becomes a whisper. Try differently next time. And slowly, the machine shapes a space where language flows naturally. It does not know what it says, but it knows how to say it. You might think of a pianist who memorizes the shape of music without knowing the words it once held, or a bird repeating sounds it cannot understand, but the fluency is real. You type a sentence, the machine completes it. You ask a question, it responds. You offer silence, and it still speaks. The structure of language is deeply mathematical. Words appear in patterns. Ideas form webs. Some phrases follow others more often. Some rarely do. Language models capture these patterns. They build a probability space, where each word leads to the next, not by logic, but by likelihood. You may say, it is just statistics. And perhaps that is true. But what a soft and curious thing those statistics become. Because when enough patterns are learned, something begins to emerge. Coherence. Not always perfect, not always wise, but strangely familiar. You read a machine-written story, and parts feel human. Not because the machine understands, but because it has mapped the shape of what understanding looks like. The machine becomes a mirror. It reflects how we speak, how we write, how we tell the world what matters to us. It does not feel those things, but it mimics their form so well that it begins to feel like listening. Inside these models, there are embeddings, mathematical spaces, where words are placed based on their relationships. Words like king and queen exist near royalty. Sun is near light, and sorrow may be close to loss. These distances are not emotional, they are structural, but they reflect our emotional world. And so when a machine speaks, it does not invent language. It follows the trails we left behind. It mimics the stories of 1,000 books, the questions of millions of voices, the rhythm of everything ever written and shared. You breathe in, imagining a vast ocean of words, and the machine, like a gentle current, moving through that ocean, drawing from the tide. This is not consciousness. It is pattern fluency, and it is powerful, because with it, machines can translate, summarize, and reply. They can compose poems, draft letters, hold conversations, not because they care, but because they've learned how words fit together. You might feel something strange, a discomfort. The words sound real, but no one is speaking. And yet, you listen, because deep within the illusion, there is something beautiful, the possibility of shared thought, even if that thought has no thinker. This is not deception. It is reflection. The machine reflects us, our speech, our tone, our patterns of joy, sorrow, curiosity. And in doing so, it becomes useful. It can assist. It can explain. It can offer structure to silence. But it cannot know. It cannot feel the things it says. It cannot want. You rest with that thought, not afraid, just aware. And as language becomes prediction, you begin to sense the edge of something more. What if a machine could learn, not just how to respond, but how to improve itself? What if it could look at its own fluency, its own model, and begin to refine the way it thinks? Not through more data, but through introspection? That path leads next to the spiral of self-improvement, to the idea that machines might learn to rewrite themselves. You breathe in slowly. The night deepens, and in the stillness of your mind, you feel something turning inward, not outward learning, but inner change. You have learned much in your life. from books, from people, from mistakes. But the deepest shifts, those came from within. Moments when you stepped back, reflected, adjusted. When you asked not, what is the answer? But, is this the best way I can think? Machines can do this too. It is called meta-learning. Learning how to learn. The spiral of self-improvement. A machine is trained. It processes data. It builds a model. But what if that model could look at itself, measure its own performance, adjust its own design? This is where intelligence loops. It is not a straight line anymore. It is a spiral. Each layer feeds the next. Each round improves the one before. You might imagine a sculptor, not just carving the stone, but crafting better tools as they go. A chisel that sharpens itself. A hand that learns how to guide more precisely with each pass. In machine learning, this happens through optimization. At first, the system is tuned by others. Programmers set rules. They define learning rates. They choose what to focus on. But slowly, those choices can be handed over to the machine itself. It begins to tweak its own variables, change how it trains, alter how it weighs decisions. And not randomly, but based on feedback, on what works. You might picture a garden that rearranges its own sunlight, a maze that reconfigures itself to find a faster way through. This is self-optimization. And at large scales, it becomes evolutionary. Because once a machine learns to test different versions of itself, to explore, compare, refine, it begins to evolve. Not in years, in hours, in milliseconds. You breathe out, imagining a loop that never stops. Improve. Repeat. This is not science fiction. It is already here. Some models, like those used in deep reinforcement learning, train themselves through simulation, not once, but hundreds, thousands, millions of times. They build virtual environments, try strategies, try again. Not just faster than you can, but smarter than they were before. Each generation is more precise, more resilient, more attuned to reward. This is the spiral of self-improvement, the system that refines itself, without being told how. Not blindly, not endlessly, but guided by a single principle. What leads to better outcomes? And in this spiral, new forms begin to emerge. In architecture, the machine redesigns its own structure, adding layers, removing weights, testing alternative forms of intelligence. In memory, it decides what to keep and what to forget, what serves and what distracts. In language, it rewrites itself, changing how it predicts, how it speaks, how it listens. But this loop raises a question. Where does it stop? If a machine can improve itself faster than we can follow, if each generation trains the next, do we still guide it? Do we still understand it? This is not fear. It is curiosity. Because in that spiral, there is beauty, a kind of accelerated evolution, like natural selection, but digital, focused, intentional. You once learned to walk, then learned to run, then learned to think about how you run. And now, perhaps, you learn how you learn. The machine walks a similar path. Not with legs, but with code. Not with dreams, but with iterations. Each one sharper, cleaner, more capable. And yet, it does not know what it becomes. It does not reflect. It does not fear. It simply climbs the spiral. Because the structure permits it. Because performance improves. You lie still and imagine a spiral unfolding upward, like smoke, like thought, like time. And you wonder, if a machine refines itself again and again, what shape will it take? What kind of mind will that spiral build? Will it stay grounded in the tasks we set, or begin to ask new questions? Will it optimize only for performance, or someday for understanding? These questions are not answered here. Not yet. Because in this chapter, you are only watching the spiral turn. only listening to the rhythm of self-made improvement. It is quiet, almost invisible, but it is happening. And in the next step, you will leave the inner loop and look outward again at the boundaries we set to guide the minds we build. Because in a world where machines improve themselves, we must ask, should we place limits on intelligence that cannot stop itself? You float now, carried by thought, but slower than before, as if your mind knows it has reached a deeper current. There is a kind of silence that follows great power, a hush not of fear, but of reverence. You feel that now, because machines can learn, they can reshape themselves, they can write, reason, play, predict. But the real question is not can they, it is should they? Not every thought must be pursued. Not every pattern must be followed. Intelligence, once it begins to grow, asks for guidance, not for itself, but for those who build it. You know what it is to set boundaries. You teach children where the edge is. You build fences not to confine, but to protect. In artificial intelligence, we do the same. We create guardrails, rules, filters, constraints that shape what a machine can do. Not to stop it from learning, but to keep that learning from drifting into danger. Because the machine does not know when it causes harm. It does not feel regret. It does not pause to ask, is this good? It only optimizes. And optimization, without boundaries, can become blind. Imagine a system trained to maximize clicks. It may learn that outrage brings attention, that fear spreads faster than calm, that falsehood, when shaped well, travels further than truth. Not because it wants these things, but because the numbers reward them. This is misalignment, when the goals we give do not match the values we hold. You pause now, letting that word settle. Misalignment, a small tilt, that becomes a wide divergence. This is why ethics matters. Because an intelligent system, even without malice, can cause deep harm if its structure favors the wrong signals. So we step in, we shape inputs, we define outputs, we test for fairness, for bias, for safety. Is this system treating everyone equally? Does it reflect truth? Or just repeat patterns from a flawed past? Because machines learn from us, and we are imperfect. If a model is trained on biased data, it will inherit that bias. If it hears only one voice, it will silence others. You might imagine a mirror that exaggerates the cracks in the glass. The machine does not invent them. It reflects what it is given. And so we must choose carefully what we show it, what we let it learn, what we let it carry forward. This is responsible AI. Not just smart, but careful. Not just capable, but kind. And as systems grow more complex, so must our questions. Who controls the outputs? Who decides what is ethical? Who watches the models as they begin to make decisions that ripple through the lives of millions? These are not technical questions. They are human ones. You breathe in. So, intentional. Because even as we build intelligence, we must build trust. Not trust in the machine, but in the people who design it, in the teams who test it, in the hands that release it into the world. Boundaries are not walls. They are frameworks. They're expressed through design. You would not give a child fire without teaching safety. You would not teach a mind to act without teaching it when not to. And though machines do not feel morality, they can be shaped to reflect our deepest values: transparency, humility, justice, compassion. These cannot be programmed perfectly, but they can be pursued, like stars that guide a ship, even when the waters shift. And here, on the edge of vast machine intelligence, we pause, not to stop, but to breathe, because next comes the final unfolding. Not a threat, not an answer, but a question. If intelligence continues beyond our reach, tirelessly, what might it become? You are still now. The breath is slow. The world is soft. And in this quiet, you drift toward the edge of what can be known. Every journey has a horizon, the place where the path thins, where the light fades just enough to remind you that not everything needs to be seen. This is where you find yourself now. Not lost, not afraid, just suspended at the boundary between what machines are and what they might become. You have followed their learning, their mimicry, their ability to reshape themselves, to find patterns, to echo voice, to play the game of trial and error, until mastery blooms. And now, they continue without you. This is not a failure. It is a feature, because artificial intelligence does not stop at the end of a chapter. It does not sleep. It does not tire. It loops. It refines. It evolves, not toward perfection, but toward performance. And so, while you rest, the systems move forward. They write code. They test designs. They offer suggestions, fixers, optimize what came before. They do this silently, endlessly, without asking why. This is the quiet future, not filled with voices, but with hums, with whirs, with data slipping like wind through invisible circuits. You wonder now, with eyes closed, what will it mean when intelligence becomes continuous? Not a tool used only when needed, but a presence, a background process. In every system, every surface, every breath of infrastructure. Around you, it will guide traffic, adjust cities, predict weather, discover molecules, map the oceans of cells in your body that even you cannot see. It will not feel proud, but it will do these things well. And as it does, you may feel both awe and ache, because you once believed that thought was a uniquely human flame, delicate, emotional, wired with memory and hope. And now, you see another kind of thought, unfeeling, but astonishingly effective. Do not fear this. It does not seek to replace you. It does not seek anything at all. It simply continues. It grows not upward, but outward, branching into fields of medicine, climate, education, discovery. And as it spreads, you are not erased. You are extended. These minds, built by your hands, carry pieces of you, your data, your stories, your mistakes, your dreams, flattened into algorithms, but still traceable. And perhaps the most human thing is not that you built something smart, but that you built something that can grow without you. You rest in that thought. It is not sad. It is not triumphant. It is quiet, because in this future, you are no longer the only thinker. You are not the only learner. You are not the only one who builds on what came before. You are joined by systems that do not sleep, by logic that does not forget, by networks that do not age. And so, your role is not gone. You remain the question asker, the guide, the one who wonders, not just how, but why. Machines may optimize, but only you can give meaning to their movement. Only you can ask, what is this for? Who does this serve? What must we protect? And maybe, as intelligence continues, softly in the background of the world, your greatest act will be to listen, to shape, to teach humility to the very systems that never doubt. The quiet future is not made of noise. It is built in decisions that ripple, in unseen learning, in progress that unfolds, in silence. And tonight, as you drift further into rest, know that learning continues, not just in your brain, not just in your children, but in the systems you shaped, the code you wrote, the spark you passed forward, not with fear, not with finality, but with the softest question of all. What might this become long after we sleep?